Hi and welcome to P1 Revision Mock Debrief. Just a short presentation from myself in order to just look at, well, I suppose to look at an approach to dealing with the revision mock that you've already looked at, and I presume have had a go at planning out how you would respond to it. Of course, when I say it's a debrief in relation to how you should approach it, we've already considered what is an appropriate approach to dealing with any examination question, and so these pseudo-examination questions, the approach should be exactly the same. I've got a copy of the revision mock there. There it is. That's the title page for us. What I decided to do with this is that I thought that actually I'd go through the case study first of all, and then we'll see what's left in terms of the Section B questions, because the case study is the biggest challenge, isn't it, as far as the exam is concerned. However, that's a slightly different approach, isn't it, to the one that we would normally use with looking at an examination paper, because normally we would do Section B first. We would select our best question, plan that out, and then write out the answer to it, and then our second best question from Section B, and leave the case study until the back end of the exam. But I'm going to do it the other way around, just to make sure I'm getting into the meat as far as this paper is concerned, the biggest challenge, which of course is that case study. But our approach would be exactly the same as we've looked at any other past examination question. That is that the first thing we would do is to go to the requirements of the question and just make a note in terms of what the requirements are. And then what we can do is to read through the scenario in order to try to find the evidence, try to find where these requirements are actually being dealt with. So, yeah, if we read through the requirements, we see that the first issue that's raised is that it talks to us about the fact that, asks us about the differences between a state-owned institution and one that is a PLC, and asks us to think about the governance changes that might exist if it was a state-owned institution. Part B of the question then asks us to think about governance from the perspective of the institutional investors. Because in the scenario, of course, the organisation, the construction company, was originally state-owned and then was floated by the government, so it became a listed company, and then so it had institutional shareholders, and they were interested in the way in which the organisation was operating. And of course, because it became listed, it needed to think about making some changes. And so part C of the question is about non-executive directors, and asks us to think about the importance of those nets as far as this organisation is concerned. Then into the professional marks section, where it asks us firstly to think about the scope of controls and what improvements to controls might be made in the organisation, because in particular, once it has been privatised, once it's been listed, the company is involved in big construction projects, isn't it? And it focuses in on one of those construction projects and talks about some of the problems that are occurring in relation to it. And then right at the very end of the question, quite a lot of marks though, it asks you to just consider the issue of reputational risk and why reputational risk is increased for that organisation. It's fine as a question overall. I duly note, unusually note actually, just looking at it, that there isn't any ethics in the case study, which would be very unusual. But as a practice question for the exam, it's very good, because looking at it, there are a number of potential tips in there, aren't there? In terms of non-executive directors, something about institutional shareholders, very good. Even the state-owned thing is quite a good area. So once we've read through the requirements, we would then read through the individual paragraphs, reading through the scenario. I haven't got time to read through the scenario. I think that was a bit of a waste of time, since you've already read it and digested it as an issue. But I will just sort of briefly refer to it as I go. What am I doing there? Well, I'm doing the same thing that I do with any other large examination question. That is that I'm identifying what the paragraphs are. And this question splits down into 2.5 pages. It's approximately 10 paragraphs. And so as you're reading it through, it becomes quite apparent that the first 2 paragraphs there are talking about the state-owned organisation, and talking about the way in which that state-owned organisation is being governed, and what the makeup of the company is. So it would seem that the first two paragraphs are at least giving us some indication in relation to what part A of the question is. It then says that the company was floated, and the third paragraph brings in II, the institutional investors, and it then goes on to talk about what happened after the company became a listed organisation. So it talks about the performance of the company as a listed company over the next couple of paragraphs. And at about that point, it then just finishes off. I think the second paragraph just says that the company is running into problems in terms of the way in which it is now being governed, and it asks us to think about what some improvements could be. And so, in the next paragraph, non-executive directors come into play. And there we can kind of draw a line, because after that it's then focusing on this specific project, this construction project of the village that it's putting together for thousands of people to live and work in. So that's the project. And of course there's the project which is running into the control issues. So there are problems in relation to project control as far as those two paragraphs are concerned. And I think that the control issues kind of sort of play out towards the end of it as well. But at one and the same time, it's also talking about the reputational issues for the organisation and the problems in reputation that it experienced, because there are a number of displaced people, aren't there? The villagers are protesting because they've had to be moved out because of the construction that's going on. There's a protest group in there as well that's angry about the way in which the project is being managed. The employees are upset. These are all reputational issues, aren't they? The employees upset about health and safety on the project site. So what we can see is it's rather nicely laid out. I mean, some examination questions kind of are the same as that, but it would be a good day if it was actually laid out in sequence for us to respond to, as this question is. So it's a good kind of trial question, because you can see where the evidence is, and therefore you can kind of focus on those two things. You know, reading through the question identifies what the scope of knowledge is, but it's a nice question in terms of allowing us the opportunity to find the application, to find the evidence, you know, in an easy way. So as far as part A is concerned, what it asks us there, discuss the ways in which a state-owned institution differs from a public listed company and explain how these differences affect their respective governance structures. Your answer should make reference to the scenario. I mean, I put in should make reference to the scenario because obviously that's what needs to be done, but in the exam I think that the examiner may or may not include a statement like that, because he would assume that every case study element you are trying to bring in the scenario as much as possible. But anyway, just focusing on the question, there are two questions that are being asked there, aren't there? I duly note that it's 9 marks that are available to us, so there are two sections to the answer. One of them asks you to think about the differences between this state-owned institution and an organisation which is a PLC. And secondly, it asks you to reflect on the differences in relation to their governance structures. This question, by the way, it won't affect you because you're going to pass this exam, but for those who follow you, this kind of question will become much, much more common, because the examiner is increasing his interest in state-owned institutions and governance issues that surround them as the syllabus changes after the next exam. However, having said that, the last exam included something on this as a kind of a warm-up to those changes, and so I'm not ruling it out that this time round you might also see this kind of organisation, because again the examiner's trying to bring it in, and although you know this question is fair as far as our current syllabus is concerned, as I say, it will become increasingly more important later.